Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition here of Chalk Talk tonight with myself, Coach Little C. Happy to talk some college football with you tonight. If you're listening on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, or on Facebook, you got any questions, comments for me, just put them in there. Do the best I can to answer your questions tonight. Going to recap the game last week in college football, Michigan and Ohio State. I'll talk about some of the big rivalry games last week. We'll preview some of the conference games this weekend, give you some predictions, and much more. If you are listening on any of the social media channels, make sure to hit subscribe. Follow me on all platforms, and I'll do the best I can to get to some of your questions and thoughts tonight. So, first thing I got to get to, of course, being a Michigan fan, talked about this a lot last week over the last 2 weeks, and I don't think anybody in the country saw this even possible last week. I mean, Michigan was a 3 touchdown underdog going into Columbus. And Ohio State, I heard a really good analogy this week. Colin Cowherd said this, and I thought about this for a little while. So he said Ryan Day and Ohio State kind of reminded him a lot of Kentucky and John Calipari. And I was thinking about this. I said, okay, interesting. Let me hear more. Kentucky always had really good athletes. They won a lot of games in the regular season, but Cal couldn't get them over the hump in the NCAA tournament. And I look at Ohio State and I said, they really remind me of a really good 7-on-7 passing league team. Really good guys on the perimeter, good running backs. The quarterback was a really big question coming into the season. During the season, that was the question with Ohio State. Everybody said if they can find a quarterback, Ohio State can be really good because they just can't screw it up. And Ohio State wide receiver which I will say that they have a ton of talent on the outside. But Will Howard's really struggled in some of these games. And everybody talked, Will Howard's managed the season. Some people said that, he was the perfect fit, Heisman Trophy, blah, 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 blah. He laid an egg against Michigan. And I really don't understand Ryan Day. And listen, I said this. A lot of people said Ryan Day should get fired. And I said, I don't know if Ryan Day should get fired. He's 66-10 against everybody else. Ryan Day has a Michigan problem. It's that easy. He has a Michigan problem. If you listen to some of the post-game comments by Sharon Moore and Ryan Day, Sharon Moore said, and Joe Klatt said it perfect. He talked to the coaches Thursday night before the game on Saturday, and Sharon Moore said, if we can keep it close going into the fourth quarter, I feel really good we can win the game. And if you think about it, the game was really close, and Michigan did what Michigan's done for years in this rivalry, and that's run the football. This rivalry over the last 20 years, the team that runs the ball for more yards wins this game. And if you think about this game, Michigan threw like 5 passes and beat Ohio State. And I kept saying, my wife and I were watching this game, which you can tell that wasn't probably the funnest time because she had her Ohio State sweatshirt on. I had my jersey on, and my son had his Michigan jersey on. But as we're watching a game, I kept telling my wife, why doesn't Ohio State go up-tempo, no huddle, and attack the perimeter? That's where their advantages have been against Michigan. And I have no clue why Chip Kelly, and I know they're putting it on Chip Kelly, but Ryan Day's the head coach. So Chip Kelly can call the plays, but at the end of the day, I would think Ryan Day jumps in and can override Chip Kelly. Why would you run the ball straight ahead against those dominant tackles for Michigan? Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham are the 2 best tackles probably in college football. They're going to go in the top 10 in the NFL draft. Why would you run the ball straight ahead? I don't get it. I don't think anybody watching the game could get it. And then you see the 2 missed field goals by Ohio State. Michigan has a really good kicker. But when you watch the game, I just kept saying to myself, how is Michigan going to win this game? They can't throw the football. But let's keep it close. Fourth quarter, let's see what happens. Ohio State played really tight in that game, like really tight. And if you watch Ryan Day the entire game, then of course you watch him the melee afterwards with the flag stuff, planting the flag. He just stood there. He stood there, and you see an assistant coach walk by, and the assistant coach looks at him, and Ryan Day goes, "What happened?" "What do you mean, what happened? Your team just got their asses handed to them. Your team's on the field fighting. Go stick up for your team. Go in there. Go in the middle of that thing and start breaking things up." Sharon Moore did. And people have asked, "What are your thoughts on the flag planting?" Here's what I'll say to the flag planting. If you don't like it, go win the damn game. Jack Sawyer for Ohio State has had a great career at Ohio State. He had the big interception, which everybody, including myself, said, "You're going to be seeing that interception for a long time," because that was a huge play. And it was the right play. All Michigan had to do was get it over his head, and it was a touchdown. But go win the game. Okay. And I know people say Ryan Day, Ohio State spent $20 million to keep this roster intact. And here's what I'm going to say to that. I'm going to give you some takeaways from this game. Number one, and I'm still standing by this, I am not going to switch my pick. I still think Ohio State has the talent to win the national championship. And hear me out on this. They took Oregon to the wire. And I know, Cody, you're listening. You're a Ducks fan. And listen, I'm with you. I like Oregon. I like Dan Lanning. Ohio State was really close in that game. Ohio State doesn't have a problem beating anybody else. They have a Michigan problem. So if they're in the field, they're probably going to get a home game. Right now, I think they have them at home against Tennessee, which I would probably take Ohio State at home. But I think it'd be a really good game. But I think they still have the talent that they can win the national championship. I really do. Now, I still think they're the most talented. I think they'll play a lot looser. But here's the crazy thing that I was thinking about this the other day. If Ryan Day loses the first game in the playoffs at home, I would fire him before he walked off the field. Or what I can see happening is he leaves on his own terms and says, "I can't deal with it anymore." And in a way, I do feel sorry for Ryan Day because maybe Ryan Day's a really good coach. And I know Coach Medicis on the podcast and the radio over the years has said Ryan Day inherited Urban Meyer's team. And by the way, Urban Meyer was 7-0 against Michigan. They've recruited well. I think even without Ryan Day, they will recruit well because it's Ohio State. They're always going to get good players. But that's the thing over the years. They've always had good players. But they just haven't been physical. And I think the running the ball right up inside, I think that's mentally Ryan Day saying, we got to be physical. We got to run the ball. We got to show them we can run the ball. If they would have threw the ball, they would have beat Michigan by more than 3 touchdowns. But they didn't. But I still think they got enough talent. My second thing I said is the shuffle in the offensive line was finally a problem. Because at times, Michigan's front four got to Will Howard. They couldn't run the ball at all against Michigan. Now, again, they were running the ball up inside. They were trying to run some outside zone stuff at times. Mason Graham, again, Kenneth Grant, those inside linemen got some pressure. And a couple of those guys from Michigan played their butts off on the back end. And the one touchdown by Smith in the end zone, it was offensive pass interference. He tackled the guy practically. But I think finally the shuffle line, I think, came back a little bit to hurt Ohio State. They're going to have to figure it out big time. And as I said, Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant were dominant up front. Makari Page and Houseman, I thought, played phenomenal for Michigan. Probably the best game they've played all year. And it just didn't look like Michigan panicked. Like, as I'm watching the game, and I was really worried because I said, I was preparing myself that Michigan was going to get blown out. And then I can look at my way and say, oh, everybody knew it, right? They were a 3-touchdown dog. Nobody picked them anyways. They're going to get blown out of the building. Next year is going to be a whole different year because they got a ton of talent coming in. But as the game went on, I kept saying, okay, all right, okay, let's just hang around. We'll hold them to a field goal. And then as the game went on, I said, they got a shot. They got a shot. But at some point, you had to say to yourself, that Ohio State offense was going to change, right? At some point, you're watching saying they have to throw the ball downfield. Like they have to throw the ball at some point downfield, and they never did. Special teams was huge. Zavada for Michigan had the 54-yard field goal. Tommy Doman, the punter, had 3 kicks. He had the one kick inside the 20, I think was like a 65-yard punt. Fielding the kicker for Ohio State missed the 2 field goals, um, which ended up being huge in that game. So I think special teams, I would have give the nod to Michigan. And the one thing I'll say too is this: they outcoached them. You cannot physically tell me when you watch that game that you would have ever said Michigan was going to win that game going in. I didn't. And then I'm looking saying, okay, so Ryan Day, I think it was third down. They had the penalty. They had 12 men on the field. Ended up being an automatic first down. Ohio State burns their timeouts, and Michigan goes down, kicks the field goal. Ohio State gets the ball back with like 40 seconds. I thought Sharon Moore called a fabulous game in the fourth quarter. And I thought Warren made a few good throws when he needed to. He had a big third down throw. Again, Colston Loveland and Will Johnson, the 2 best players, never stepped on the field for Michigan. And again, it's absolutely crazy to even think that they were without their 2 best players. They barely had any offense, and they won the football game. Absolutely crazy. But again, going back to it, I still think that Ohio State can win a national championship. So some of the games I want to get into from last week, I don't want to spend too much time because I want to give you my picks and all that. We'll get into some of the 12-team playoff and much more. We had a great weekend rivalry game. We kicked off Thanksgiving. Memphis over Tulane. Memphis looked really good. And Memphis was 10-2. Tulane still got a shot in the American. They're going to play Army, but no chance to get into the 12-team playoff. So that kind of puts a little bit of a damper into that. The Georgia Tech game in 8 overtime was fantastic. Haynes King, the quarterback for Georgia Tech, tip your hat to him as you watch that game. I'm going to read you his numbers. 26 of 36 for 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, 24 carries as a quarterback, 24 carries, 110 yards, 3 touchdowns. Here's the big stat, and this is what worries me for Georgia going forward, and even against Texas on Saturday night, who, by the way, they beat 30-15 in the middle of the season. Georgia Tech rushed for 260 yards against Georgia. At Georgia. I don't remember the last time, I'd have to go back and look, to see when a Georgia team at home gave up 260 yards rushing. That worries me a little bit. Carson Beck played phenomenal. 5 touchdown passes. He did have 0 interceptions. If he plays like that in the playoff, Georgia can win the whole thing. I still think they got to get better up front. But again, the last time Georgia played Texas, Georgia was really good up front. So I think that's going to be a really good game. But tip your hat to Georgia Tech and Brent Pry for the job that they did. And I thought one of the best moments, and I know it was a loss, and as a coach, if you ask a coach, you lose a good game against a team that you weren't favored to beat at all. There's no consolation, like feel sorry for me. We don't feel sorry for us. It's a win because we took Georgia to 8-0. Nobody thought we were going to win. Okay, it's a rivalry game. Throw the records out. But to see the job that Brent Pry and this Georgia Tech all year put Georgia Tech back on the map. And they should have won this game. I thought they just ran out of gas. Haynes King just ran out of gas. I think at the 1 overtime when they scored, I would have went for 2 probably to win it, because the longer this thing went, I just kept saying Georgia's going to find a way. Georgia's going to find a way. And they did late in that one. Ole Miss, Mississippi State. People are going to debate Ole Miss with this 12-team playoff. And I'll talk a little bit about them, but they lost to Kentucky, which is a bad loss for them. Alabama had the bad loss too, to Oklahoma that finished 6-6. And I said 2 weeks ago, if Ole Miss gets in, Ole Miss is a team you do not want to see. They handled Georgia at Ole Miss. They handled them convincingly, running the ball, throwing the ball. Jackson Dart was really good for Ole Miss. But they're on the outside, looking in. And I still think that this is one of those years Lane Kiffin's going to go back and say, God, even with the 12-team playoff, I still had a shot. They did have a really good shot. They're not getting it. There's no way based off the rankings last week um, that they were going to get in. Colorado, what more do you say about Colorado? I was really disappointed. I think America wanted to see Colorado um, in the playoff. I wanted to at least see him in the Big 12 title game. Shedeur Sanders was phenomenal, over 400 yards passing, 5 touchdowns. Travis Hunter. This is a really, really a tough year because the Ashton Genty kid from Boise State, any other year, I think would win the Heisman Trophy. If you go back, and I got a cough drop stuck in my mouth. If you go back to the year, I think it was the year Peyton Manning and Charles Woodson. I think it was the same year. Peyton Manning had all the numbers in the world, and everybody thought Peyton Manning was going to win the Heisman Trophy, and Charles Woodson won the Heisman Trophy. I think this is one of those seasons where if it was any other year, Genty wins this thing going away, over 2,000 yards. I think he's got 2,200 yards rushing. But I think what we're seeing out of Travis Hunter this season, you're never, ever going to see something like this for a long time. He's a unicorn. He's the best player in college football. He's been the best player all year. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. I think he wins the Heisman Trophy. And here's the thing with Boise State. When we get into the playoffs, I'll talk a little bit about this. They really haven't played anybody. I think they played Oregon early in the year. I think it was Oregon. Cody can correct me if you're watching, but I think it was Oregon. Other than that, they haven't played anybody. And the crazy part about it is if they win this week, they're going to probably get the first round bye. So maybe they played Ohio State or a Penn State, who I think is a horrible matchup for Boise State. I think they're overrated, and I don't think they're going to be able to pound this Genty kid 30, 40 times against somebody really good. But I think it's a really good story this year, and I tip my hat to him because we probably won't see a 2,000-yard rusher for a little bit of time too. So it's unfortunate we're not going to see Colorado play anymore. We'll see him play in a bowl game, and tip your hat. Deion Sanders said Shedeur, Travis Hunter, Shiloh are all playing in the bowl game because it means something to them. And I'm happy that they are going to play in that. We'll get to see them one more time. Now we'll have to see who they're going to play. But I think it'll be pretty cool. Texas A&M, it was great to see this rivalry back again. I'm not overly impressed with Texas. And if I'm Texas and I'm Steve Sarkisian, Archie Manning's my guy. I don't even know why we keep throwing Quinn Ewers out there. Quinn Ewers, the last time they played Georgia, did not play well at all in that game, and they went to Archie Manning late in that game. 17-7. A&M played really good defensively. Ewers had the interception. Texas was really good up front. A&M struggled to move the ball. But again, great to see that rivalry back. So Texas is in. Penn State, not going to waste my time. The only thing that was worth talking about with this, at the end of the game, Mike Loxley and James Franklin at midfield. Loxley, was on him because Franklin threw a pass. He was mad that he ran the score up. And normally I would agree with this. James Franklin had a really good comment, and some people are going to say, and Cody's saying, oh, this will be pretty good, Cody. I got to give you that. Colorado versus Syracuse. I'd love to see it. But I think the comments that James Franklin made, because I had to listen to this, because at first I'm like, I'm not a big fan, even as a high school coach, and maybe I would do this differently now than when I coached in the past. I was one of those coaches that if I got a big lead late in the game and put my backup string kids and third string kids or whoever to get them in the game, I always just ran the clock out, turn around, hand the ball off, blah. And nowadays you see coaches that are going to throw the ball, and I kind of will agree with coaches now to say, well, Rocky practices all week. When he gets in, he deserves it. If he's a quarterback, he deserves to throw the ball. And James Franklin said nowadays with the 12-team playoffs and the committee watching, you got to score points. and you got to win convincingly. And James Franklin said, listen, my twos and threes were in. Your first team was in. Stop us. And I don't disagree with that. So, like Mike Loxley keeping your first string defense in against Penn State second and third string, stop them. Get out of that cover two. Play something different. So I'm going to agree with James Franklin. I didn't have a problem with it. Some did, but I didn't. South Carolina is the hottest team in the country, winning their last 4 games. I think they've beaten 3 or 4 ranked teams at the end of the season. They hung on and beat Clemson. South Carolina is on the outside looking in. I mean, Ole Miss beat them head to head, so did Alabama. So, the people that say South Carolina should be in, there's arguments for South Carolina, Ole Miss, and Bama. Bama's in, and I'll get to a few things in a little bit because a lot of people are saying Miami belonged in. I didn't have a problem with them not getting in and Alabama in. I would have been good either way, but we'll talk more about that. Tip your hat to Shane Beamer. Sellers, their quarterback, is an absolute stud. And Beamer's getting some kids to come there. He got some good guys in the portal already. They got a top 10 recruiting class, so good for Shane Beamer, who a few years ago was on the hot seat. And he gets and Dabo Swinney, even with the loss with the Syracuse win, Dabo gets a chance to win the ACC and go to the playoff, which I think is absolutely crazy. Which brings me to Syracuse. Most of the people that have listened to our show over the years on Sports Watch know that I've been pretty critical of Syracuse over the years. And a stat man would say, you're not a Syracuse fan. You always root against them. And I always joke and say I'm part of the media. I picked Syracuse this year to go 9-3. I said 9-3, 10-2 with the schedule that they have was an easy schedule. This was an easy schedule for Fran Brown. There's nobody that's listening to me tonight or what listen to me on a replay would argue and say this was a really tough schedule for Syracuse. Completely happy with the season that they had at 9-3. I don't care who they played. You still got to go out and win games. And this win against Miami was huge. And to see the people at the Dome storm the field, I thought was awesome. Something we haven't seen in a long time. And Fran Brown has brought excitement back to the Dome. He's bringing recruits. There's people now you see on Twitter, and I said this before, you get on Twitter and you see all these people now that are saying, well, Syracuse is an option, 4-star such and such. One of his choices is Syracuse, which I think is really cool because the Dino Babers era and the other years in the past, you're not going to see that. So I do tip my hat to Fran Brown. This was a really big win. Kyle McCord has been sensational. I'm really happy for the kid. I really am because Ohio State fans ran him out of town because of one pass. One pass last year, the interception where he got hammered, threw it across the middle, picked off, Ohio State loses. They did not lose because of Kyle McCord. It was not a Kyle McCord thing. I'll go back to what I said in the beginning of the show. It was a Michigan problem for Ryan Day and the Buckeyes, not a Kyle McCord thing. And listen, Kyle McCord is Coach Medicis. We got a little group chat that goes on, and Nick always puts McCord greater than such and such, and I would say McCord greater than Will Howard. That if McCord's the quarterback at Ohio State this year, I think they may beat Michigan. But you can't do that. It's not fair to do that. But hats off. Cam Ward played really well, too, for Miami. And one of the things I'm going to say about this here is we lean into the 12-team playoff is this. Miami's lost the last 2 games. Their defense is atrocious. Now, many people, including myself, would like to see Miami and Cam Ward go up against a Tennessee defense or an Ohio State defense and some of those top defenses. And Cam Ward came out and said, the ACC defenses are better. Okay, I get it. But you did lose the last 2 games, and I think some of it's the eye test with Miami. But I want to read you this stat. So I was trying to look at the Miami piece, the Ole Miss piece, and the Alabama piece. And here's some of the things I wrote down, okay? And if you have some thoughts and you're watching, let me know. The top 4 seeds right now, Oregon, Texas, SMU, Boise State. SMU, as I've said for the last 2 to 3 weeks, I still think they're going to beat Clemson. I think they're that good. I'm not going to pick the other games yet because I don't want to give my picks out yet. But I was looking at Miami, and here's some of the things that I looked at. So Miami hammered Florida. We're going to say, okay, well, Florida's not very good. Florida finished 7-5, beat Ole Miss. Billy Napier, I've talked on this show for a while now, probably for the last month or so. Florida is one of the hottest teams in the country. Billy Napier should get, I would actually give Billy Napier some votes for Coach of the Year for the job that he's done because he had the toughest schedule in the country, and he was basically thrown to the wolves. Everybody said before the season started, Billy Napier wasn't going to survive, myself included, after about week 2 or 3. So Miami hammered Florida. I think that says something because, again, the way Florida finished. Florida beat Ole Miss. So to me, and I'm a huge Lane Kiffin guy, I don't know if Ole Miss has the argument over Miami because of that, okay? Here's another one. So Miami hammered South Florida, okay? If you remember this, college football fans, South Florida was in a war with Alabama and Tuscaloosa. Late in the fourth quarter, South Florida was giving Alabama a game. Miami hammered South Florida, okay? So that's 2 pros for me for Miami. 2 losses on the road. I just said they lost to Syracuse, who's now ranked. They lost to Georgia Tech, who, by the way, again, just took Georgia to 8 overtimes and should have won in Athens, okay? They lost both those games by a combined 9 points. So those, to me, are not too bad losses for Miami. So they dropped Miami, and here's, again, this is where I had to really think about this because tonight, before I came on the air, I said, I don't have a problem with Alabama ahead of them. And I still don't, but the more I go through my notes here, I'm looking, saying, I think Miami does have some reasons to be pissed off that they didn't get in. Here's the one I was really surprised at for this. Miami's lost to Syracuse, who is ranked 20th right now. They weren't ranked when they played them, but now Syracuse is 20. They dropped Miami further in the polls than they dropped Ohio State, who was a 3-touchdown favorite at home against Michigan, who was 6-5. They dropped them further than the Buckeyes. The Buckeyes didn't drop that far down. They dropped further down, which I was a little surprised at that. I actually thought Ohio State would have dropped further down. Home game, they lose by, a close game, 3-touchdown favorites. Miami goes on the road, loses a tight game to Syracuse, who's now ranked. Favors me, point Miami. A lot of points for Miami. Alabama, so here's a couple things with Alabama, okay? So for Alabama, I think they said, and the stat was, and maybe I wrote it down wrong, they were 6-1 against top 25 teams, and I think Miami was 4-2. Okay, I get it. Still doesn't give me a reason to say they belonged in over Miami. However, strength of schedule, Bama's strength of schedule, stronger than Miami's. The eye test, okay. You can sell me on that. But here's why I would go back and say I do think Miami should be in. You can't go off a strength of schedule because Indiana's strength of schedule was horrendous. Their only tough game they've played all year, they lost. They played Ohio State. They got blown out of the building. They should have lost to Michigan because they struggled against Michigan. And Indiana is in right now. So I don't know if I buy that argument. This committee is, 1 week they're talking about strength of schedule. The other week they're saying, well, we're not going to penalize teams for getting in the conference championship if they lose. So in other words, you're telling me with SMU in, if SMU loses, they're still in. So really, when you look at the playoff right now, Oregon's in, Texas is in, right? Ohio State is in, Tennessee's in, Georgia's in, Indiana's in, Notre Dame's in, Penn State's in. That's 8 teams. Automatic in no matter what, because they said if the teams aren't playing, they're not going to drop and they can't move up. Okay. So that means the Big 12 winner, Arizona State or Iowa State, are in. So that's 9. If Boise State wins, they're in. They would be the highest of the Power Fours. And I think what's actually crazy is if Arizona State or Iowa State win out of the Big 12 and Boise State wins, Boise State would still get the first round bye because Boise State was ranked higher than Arizona State and Iowa State. Throw that out. Next year, throw it out because there's no way. I don't care if Boise State plays Arizona State or Iowa State on a neutral field. I would take Arizona State or I would take Boise State. And I would say the strength of schedule for Arizona State and Iowa State is tougher than Boise State. Boise State didn't really play anybody all year. So 8 teams are in no matter what. So the Bama case could say, okay, they beat Georgia, really convincing win. It was. To that day, I said that was one of the best wins in college football. But then you go and lay an egg and you lose 24-3 to Oklahoma that's 6-6. That's a bad loss. That's a bad loss for Alabama. So I get it, but again, Miami's now what would be really crazy would be this. What if SMU loses and they have 2 losses? They have 2 losses, Miami has 2 losses. Do you want to compare those 2 teams? Because the committee said this week they're not going to penalize teams that get in to the conference championship and lose. So basically you're telling me SMU's in. Win or lose, SMU is in. What I think would be really crazy, and I think the committee would say this, and I could be completely wrong. By the way, I think SMU is going to beat Clemson. I've said it for the last month. SMU is the best team in the ACC. However, let's just say they lose. I can see the committee saying SMU's lost, 2 losses. Let's compare them to Miami. We'll put Miami in. Everybody's happy. You think anybody wants to see SMU in? I do because I think SMU is really good. I think Coach Lashley has done a fantastic job. I think he's one of the best coaches in the country. I think they have one of the best offenses in the country. They're really good defensively. They are going to give Clemson all they can handle. So if that happens, does Miami get in? And I'm going to be the first one to tell you. Coming on here tonight, my notes are on the screen so you can't see them. I can. My argument was I didn't have a problem with the committee putting Bama in, but then I looking at my notes here that I had on Miami, and I'm saying, how the hell could you not put Miami in? I don't care if their defense stinks. It's like in March Madness, right? Are you putting the hot team that's played really well, or are you going to put, well, the teams that lost late in the year, people say it's better to lose early than lose late? I guess. But Miami lost 2 games by a combined 9 points to a Syracuse team that's ranked in 9-3 and a Georgia Tech team that just took Georgia to 8 overtimes at Georgia. So you're penalizing them because their defense stinks. I'd like to see Miami against Tennessee. I'd like to see Miami against Ohio State, see what Cam Ward can do on the big stage. I don't think many people have watched Miami. And I'm not sitting here tonight telling you that I have a problem with what the committee did because, again, I think you can make arguments either way. I think Mario Cristobal, this happens every year. It happened with him at Oregon. It's happened with him again here at Miami. They lose games late that they shouldn't lose, and they're going to get penalized. So, again, I think there's a really good case. Now, Ole Miss's case, Lane Kiffin tried to make a case, and just some of the things. So they beat Bama and they beat South Carolina. 2 really good wins for Ole Miss. The Georgia win, they dominated Georgia, which is huge. They beat South Carolina, who South Carolina right now is the hottest team in the country. That's why, like, if you look at Ole Miss and you look at South Carolina, it's hard to really say, well, can you put South Carolina in? Well, Ole Miss beat them. And Bama did too. So I'm okay with them keeping South Carolina. I think it's a great story. They're one of the hottest teams in the country. And on a neutral field, there's a lot of teams in the field I would pick South Carolina to beat. But unfortunately, you got to win some of the games that you should have. Now, their strength of schedule, South Carolina's is 31. Alabama's is 17. But, but Ole Miss lost to a 4-8 Kentucky team who has been atrocious. That's a bad loss for Lane Kiffin. If they beat Kentucky, I think they're in. They lost to Florida too on a crazy play, but I don't think that Florida's as bad of a loss as it is to Kentucky. Kentucky's horrible. I think Stoops is going to get fired, and I think his time in Kentucky is going to come to an end. I think it's time to move on. But again, those are the arguments. So again, if I'm looking at those three teams, and right now, again, here's how this was going to shape up, and I don't know how much movement we're going to see. Oregon's the 1 seed. They would play right now the winner of Ohio State and Tennessee. Tennessee would have to travel to Ohio. Tough game for Josh Heupel to travel to. I just can't imagine sitting in Columbus. My wife and I were cold when we went out there 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. I can't imagine sitting at the Horseshoe, possibly in snow, the cold weather, Tennessee traveling to play Ohio State. I don't know, but if again, could you imagine if Ohio State loses another game at home, back-to-back weeks, they lose at home, and Ryan Day's probably done. So I think that would be a really good game. But Oregon would have to get the winner of that. How crazy is that? And Cody said it, and a bunch of us said this. The 5 seeds got the easier path to the championship game. Penn State is the 5 seed right now, would play Arizona State. I think Penn State would be favored by 2 touchdowns. If they won that game, they'd play Boise State, or I think Penn State would beat Boise State. So that's an easier path. Oregon would have to play Ohio State or Tennessee. Ohio State played Oregon really tough, and I think Tennessee would be a tough out. Texas is the 2 seed, would play. Georgia's a 7 against Indiana. I think Georgia hammers Indiana. That would be in Athens. Alabama, Notre Dame, I think would be a really good game. I would pick Notre Dame to win that game, and then I'd pick Notre Dame to beat SMU. So I think some of those teams, I think next year they got to reseed this thing. After the first round, they should reseed this thing because I think, again, it's not fair. I think the top seed has a really tough path to the national championship. I was thinking of this, and then I'm going to get into predictions here, and then I'll wrap things up. It's so crazy to think that college football this year is going to go till the end of January. Like, how crazy is that? Normally, you'd say, what, the first week in January, maybe the second week in January, you got all the big, at that time, the BCS bowl games. And then the other thing I'm thinking about is how crazy is it to think, what if we were still with the 4-team playoff? How crazy would we be talking for the 4-team playoff? Now we're at 12, debating 13, 14, and 15. My answer is go to 16, keep it at that. I think the FCS does it right with 16 teams, but we won't get into that tonight because there's not enough time. All right, let's pick the conference championship games. The first one up, the Mountain West. These two played already before. It was a close game. I'm going to take Boise State. I'm going to take Boise State laying the 4 points. I think UNLV. Can you imagine, though, UNLV wins? They're in the playoff out of the Mountain West, which would be awesome to see. But I think Boise State gets it done, and I'll take Boise laying the points. The other one, Tulane, 9-3. Tulane's coming off a loss to Memphis on Thanksgiving. Army's had a fantastic season. I'm going to take Tulane to bounce back. I think they cover the 5. Army has had a fantastic season. It'll set up Army-Navy next week. But I will take Tulane in the American Athletic Conference. Moving on, the Big 12 championship game, Iowa State at 10-2 against Arizona State, 10-2. I'm a huge Matt Campbell guy. I think, people are talking about the Ohio State job, and if for some reason Ryan Day were to leave on his own or get fired, Matt Campbell's name is an option that I would pick the phone up and at least entertain it. But I don't think they beat Arizona State. I think Kenny Dillingham's done a fantastic job this year at Arizona State. I think they're hot. They can score. I think it'll be a good game. I'm going to take Arizona State, given the 2 points. Iowa State's had a really good year, but I'm going to ride Arizona State into the playoff. The other game, the SEC game, I believe this is the 4:00 game. I think the Penn State game is the night game, which would be cool. But the SEC, so these two teams played in the middle of the season. Georgia beat them 30-15. Texas is -2.5. I've went back and forth on this game because I think Texas is really physical up front. I don't have a lot of faith in Quinn Ewers. I think you might see Archie Manning at some point. I think yours is still banged up. I'm going to go Georgia, and I'm going to switch my pick because, again, before coming on the air here tonight, I picked Texas to win this game. I'm going to pick Georgia. I think Carson Beck plays a really good game again. If Texas can play a game flawless on offense, if yours is flawless, I think Texas can win. But I'm going to take Georgia, and I'm going to take Georgia getting the 2.5 to beat Texas in the SEC title game. The Big Ten title game, Oregon, Penn State. I think this is going to be a really fun game. This is a really good opportunity for James Franklin to win a big game. And the more and more I was thinking about this game, I said it depends on Drew Aller. What are they going to do with Drew Aller at quarterback? Because I think Penn State's defense is going to keep them in this game. I thought this line would be a little bigger. I thought this line would be like the Ducks giving Penn State maybe 7, 7.5, 6.5, somewhere around there. If Penn State can run the ball, Oregon's pretty good against the run. I just don't see Oregon losing this game. As much as I want to root for James Franklin to win a big game, I think Penn State's still in the playoff regardless of this. I think Oregon keeps it going. I'm going to take Oregon, and I'm going to take Oregon laying a 3.5. I think Dan Lanning punches his ticket, and I think they stay the 1 seed in the playoff. And then the last game, I just can't believe Dabo Swinney at 9-3's got a shot to win this game. And Fran Brown said in this post game, if you saw him on the field, he said, "Dabo, you owe me. I got you in. I got you in." And Dabo said if they win the national championship, which is not going to happen, but if they were, he would hook Fran Brown up. SMU wins this game, and I think SMU beats them by more than 2.5. I've been on SMU all season. I think they win this game convincingly. Going away, Cade Klubnik, though, the quarterback for Clemson, I think he's had a really good year. I think Clemson's had a good year, but they backdoored into this thing, and I think SMU cruises in the ACC championship game, and I think SMU wins, and I think SMU will get one of those first-round buys in the playoffs. So those are the picks. I appreciate you tuning in tonight to Chalk Talk with myself, Coach Little C. I'll let you know on Sunday in the Mohawk Valley Sports Watch, but I appreciate you following me on Chalk Talk. I appreciate you following me on all the podcast shows that we air here on the Rock Pile. So I hope you enjoyed tonight. I know I did. I always love talking college football. Be careful, be safe. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I'll see you again